All right, today we're going to talk about vascular and non-vascular plants. We're going to intro into our plants. I've got some good examples, so we'll get a good little brief lesson of each of these. Let's talk about our non-vascular plants first. These are non-vascular plants. They're alive. I have over here, this is what we call a liverwort. And we're going to look at a poster in a minute. We'll see it a little bit better, but I can zoom in a little more. So there's an example of a liverwort. Got a little bit of new growth coming on this one here. And then over here, of course, the one that everyone's probably familiar with, this is our moss. Most people have seen mosses growing out either in your yard or along trees, logs, things like that. So these are our non-vascular plants. So let's go over here. We'll take a look at our posters that we have. You can look at these anytime you need to. But here's a nice picture here of the liverwort. You can see that little structure there, and you say, oh, well, it looks like a leaf. Well, it's not a leaf, even though we might say, oh, it's leafy looking. It's actually called a thallus. It's leaf-like. We like to use those terms. It looks like something. So it's leaf-like, and these are rhizoids. They're root-like. So they do attach. This holds them into the ground. It'll act like a root for any other type of plant. So it'll hold them into the ground and give them a little bit of area that they can grab onto, and of course, that will pull moisture up. Again, when we're talking moisture being pulled up here, it's going cell to cell. All right, it's like osmosis, really. It's water going into an area that needs it. Of course, here's a close-up of a moss. We can see where it looks nice and full and green in our picture or in our live specimen. And here again, these are rhizoids. All right, and they, of course, one of the things that keeps these separate from a lot of, like a flowering plant, is these will only reproduce by spores. Only reproduce by spores. That brings us to the next type of plants. So these are our non-vascular. We're going to get into some vascular plants. Over here, this is a fern leaf. And this, of course, you say, well, yeah, this is pretty good size. And these plants are vascular because they do have the tubes that transport water and nutrients throughout the plant, the xylem and the phloem. And these reproduce by spores also. So in that sense, they are similar to the mosses and the liverworts. They reproduce by spores, not by seeds. And so this is an example of spores on the back. So we can pass this around. You can look at it. You can touch the spores. It's not a problem. All right, this is a holly fern, I believe. And then I also, lucky enough to have some examples of a horsetail. And a lot of you were saying earlier, well, it looks like bamboo. But bamboo is actually a grass. It's actually going to be related to our flowering plants. The stems for this are hollow. And again, if we compare this, our poster shows us a much better reproductive tip for these. And that's where the spores are made. So we have our horsetails here, and we have our ferns. But unlike the non-vascular, these do have true roots. They do have a stem. For the ferns, the stem is usually underground. And of course, with the horsetail, this would be our stem. All right? And then they do have roots. So much better to be holding to the ground. Easy enough to do. And again, we'll pass some of these around. You'll be able to feel them. Actually, the horsetails have an interesting little history to them. Supposedly, with these rough edges here, colonists would use them to scrub pots, or even to do some almost like you would do for sanding, things like that. So they have a little rough edge, so when you get that, you can roll this in your fingertips and you can feel those edges. So there's an interesting little fact for that. We then get into what we call gymnosperms, and these are, everyone's familiar with the pine cone. All right, so these are typically going to make cones. There are a couple of members of this group that don't, but the cones produced by these, the seeds are contained in there. This is a great picture of how the seeds are. And if you've ever seen squirrels eating these, that's what they're going for. And there are certain birds that have beaks designed just to get in and get those seeds out of a pine cone. So this is one of our local pine cones here. This is one I have got from someone. This has got to be from out west. It's a very large cone. It's definitely not anything I've seen where we are. But again, this allows you to really see in there. And you can see where the seeds would have been contained inside of this. Gives you an idea of where they were, so you can see those openings where the seeds were held into there. So that's our gymnosperms. And of course, they are producing seeds. Our ferns and horsetails not producing seeds, our mosses and liverworts not producing seeds. And then we get to our last group here, and that is our flowering plants. And of course, this actually, you say, gosh, that's what you think of mostly? Well, you should, because this has the largest amount of members in it anyway. So we have the largest amount of species contained in what we call the angiosperms. And when you say, well, how am I going to remember gymnosperm and angiosperm? I always say, think of Angie likes flowers. And that'll give you the clue is, okay, this is the one with the flowers. And then you should be able to tell, okay, gymnosperms has to do with our cones. So when we're talking about the angiosperms, you don't always see a flower for everything. So think of like when I talked about the grasses. There are certain things, you don't think of an oak tree blooming, but they do. It's just something you don't notice. You don't see it that often. But since we're talking about it, these are definitely seed producers. And so here's, yeah, this would be a very large seed container. This is actually what's inside of there. And you've probably seen these on TV or even in a cartoon for coconuts. Well, this is actually the seed part that's inside of this coconut. That's what's inside of here. So that's what you want to be thinking about. Large seed for this. A lot of seeds are, of course, very tiny. Think about a lot of the vegetables you eat. Well, we're growing a bean plant here. This is a lima bean. So we've got that there. Getting ready to get a little bloom here eventually and some more leaves on it. So simple enough. Think of seed producing. Easy to remember for vegetables. Most of the things you eat are going to be angiosperms. Any fruit, any vegetable, that's where it's coming from. All right, you got it? So now we'll do some reviewing. You can look at these posters whenever you need to. All right.